She Sleeps in the Attic. Written by Stories After Dark. Chapter 1. The House Next Door. It began on a Wednesday, quiet and damp, with the kind of sky that never makes up its mind. Neither fully gray nor fully dark, just a muted stretch of clouds smudging out the sun. Ethan noticed it before the others did, the subtle shift in the house next door. It had been empty for as long as he could remember. Ivy curled over its brick walls like veins, windows crusted with grime, porch sagging with rot. In the winter, it looked skeletal. In the summer, forgotten. He'd once seen a raccoon crawl through a shattered pane on the second floor and never come out. People joked the place was haunted, but mostly they just forgot it existed, until the porch light flickered on. He didn't see anyone install a bulb. One evening, it was dead. The next, it blinked weakly through the dusk, like a dying firefly. It wasn't the light itself that unnerved him. It was the way it pulsed in a rhythm too slow to be electric, too deliberate to be accidental. A kind of lazy breathing. That was when he realized the house had a heartbeat. He stood at the window of his second-floor bedroom, watching it blink. No truck had come, no car parked out front. The lawn was still choked in weeds, the blinds still drawn, and yet something was different. It wasn't empty anymore, and that made it worse. Ben, his roommate, brushed it off when Ethan mentioned it. "Maybe it's squatters," Ben said, mouth full of cereal, eyes locked on a game stream. Crackheads love that kind of aesthetic. But Ethan knew squatters didn't move in silently, didn't replace porch lights, and certainly didn't stand still for hours in upstairs windows. Because he saw it again. 2 nights later, after midnight, as rain needled against the glass, he saw the shape, tall, unmoving, framed by the second-floor window. No light inside. Just the suggestion of a figure, blacker than the dark behind it, its head tilted slightly. Not enough to be natural, just enough to feel like it knew he was watching. He didn't sleep that night. When he blinked, he still saw it there. When he woke the next morning, though he wasn't sure he'd ever really slept, the window was empty again. The next day, Ethan walked past the house. Slowly. His breath puffed white in the chill air, though the forecast had called for early autumn warmth. The sidewalk was cracked beneath moss and dead leaves. The gate to the yard hung open on one rusted hinge. No car, no mail. Just that same porch light, flickering gently, like a nerve twitch. He stopped at the edge of the path, pretending to check his phone, but really listening. Trying to catch any movement, any hint of life beyond the walls. The curtains in the downstairs window were old lace, yellowed like teeth. Behind them, nothing. Then he heard it, a faint rhythmic scraping, not loud, not desperate, just consistent. Flesh dragging against wood, something slow, methodical. He stepped back and kept walking. That night, Ethan sat at his desk with the window open an inch. Wind pressed in, carrying the smell of damp brick and leaf mold. The scrape came again. Quieter, this time, like it had moved deeper into the house, or maybe farther up. The light across the way blinked twice, then held steady. He tried to distract himself, scrolling through old forums about haunted houses, urban legends, parasitic architecture. But nothing felt satisfying. Nothing felt close. There was no name for what he felt crawling under his skin. Sometime around 2 a.m, he leaned out the window, half expecting to catch that figure again. The window was still empty, but the light, still glowing, cast just enough illumination to see something else. The curtains on the second floor had changed. No longer lace. Now they were black, heavy, like theater drapes, drawn shut. He hadn't seen them drawn. He hadn't seen them open. And worse, he realized with a strange chill, there were fingerprints on the inside of the glass. Thin, smeared tracks, as though someone had pressed their face to the pane and slid down slowly, leaving behind the oil of their skin. The next morning, the house was ordinary again. The porch light was off, no shape in the window, curtains drawn. Ben didn't remember Ethan mentioning anything weird about the place, and Tanya just shrugged when he brought it up. "Maybe the landlord's finally trying to flip it," she said, zipping up her hoodie. "Or maybe your insomnia's turning into full-blown madness." She laughed, but Ethan didn't. That day at class, he couldn't focus. The professor's voice buzzed like a fan. The fluorescent lights hummed above him like insects. He kept turning toward the door, expecting it to open, hoping it wouldn't. And then it did. A girl stepped in, late, her movements oddly stiff, like someone wearing a human body for the first time. Her sweater was oversized, sleeves too long, the hem brushing her knees. A long skirt pooled around heavy black boots, the kind that seemed too big for her ankles. But what caught him, what froze him, was the smell that followed her into the room. Dust and iron. Not blood, not quite. Something older, like rusted nails soaked in rain. She took a seat in the back, never looked up, never blinked. Ethan didn't turn around once during the lecture. He felt her behind him like a low-grade fever, like static in his jaw. And when class ended, he looked back, just once, and saw her watching him. Not curiously, not shyly, just watching, as if she knew he'd been watching too. That night, Ethan returned home to find the porch light on again. This time, it didn't blink. It burned, constant and cold. A single pale eye staring across the lawn, into his window. Into him. Chapter 2. The Girl in Black. Lena arrived in the middle of the week, when the sky had been bleached a washed-out yellow, and the air tasted of rain that refused to fall. No one saw her come in. She was simply there, sitting in the third row of the lecture hall, her body a hunched silhouette draped in black, as if she'd been waiting for the room to notice her. Most didn't. Most never do. But Ethan did. There was something in the way she sat, perfectly still, with her arms folded like she was trying to keep herself from unraveling. Her hair hung in limp, dark clumps that caught no light. Her skin was too pale, with a bruised tinge beneath the jaw that suggested she hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. She looked like a statue in mourning, left out in the rain. When the professor called her name from the register, she didn't respond at first. Heads began to turn toward her like a slow wave rolling across the room. Then she looked up and spoke. Her voice didn't sound like it belonged to someone that age. It was soft, but scraped raw at the edges, like a throat that had gone unused for too long. "I have returned where I was buried." The room went silent. The professor frowned, then said her name again, louder, as if maybe she hadn't heard him. She only nodded once, very slightly, then lowered her head. There were some awkward chuckles from the back. A few students whispered. Someone made a crack about method acting. But the joke didn't hold for long. No one really wanted to look at her. And those who did, didn't want to look for long. Ethan tried not to stare, but his eyes kept drifting back. Her fingers were thin and twitching beneath her sleeves, like they were remembering something without her. A tangle of dried mud crusted her boots, and there was a streak of something dark beneath one thumbnail that might have been paint. Or not. What bothered him most was her stillness. The world moved around her, pages turned, students fidgeted, Light flickered on the ceiling, but she sat frozen in her own pocket of silence, untouched by the noise. When class ended, she moved with the same fluid, eerie precision. She stood, walked out, and vanished down the hall without a glance at anyone. That night, rumors bloomed like mold across campus. She was called Ghost Girl, Crypt Chic. Some said she'd been in a psych ward upstate. Others said she was the daughter of that weird preacher who burned down his church. Someone claimed she never blinked, not once during the entire hour-long lecture. Ethan hadn't seen her blink either. He hadn't meant to follow her, not exactly. But after class, he found himself walking the long way home. His boots clicked unevenly on the sidewalk as he watched the shape in the distance. Her back, her hair, the sweep of her skirt like a shadow flowing behind her. She didn't look both ways when she crossed the street. Didn't seem to notice the world at all. She turned down his street without hesitation, walked past the broken lamppost, past the storm drain that never stopped dripping, and stepped through the gate of the house next door. The black house. The porch light was on again. She didn't knock, didn't fumble with keys. She simply opened the door, and it welcomed her without a sound. Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk, heart pounding so hard he could hear it echo in his jaw. A light blinked in the upper window, just once, then darkness again. When he got inside, Ben was in the living room playing some horror survival game with the volume too loud. Monsters shrieked from the screen. Something roared and lunged. Ben laughed like he was untouchable. Ethan tried to say something about the girl, about where she lived, about what she'd said, but the words felt stupid in his mouth. He sat on the couch instead and let the noise wash over him. That night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels deliberate, like something had stopped moving just to hear you move. Ethan couldn't sleep. His eyes kept twitching toward the ceiling. Then he heard it again. Crying. Not loud, not sobbing. Just the barest whimper, like someone had swallowed their scream and was choking on the leftovers. Muffled, wet. It was coming from above, from the attic. The sound faded before he could follow it. He stood in the hallway barefoot, staring at the ceiling hatch, the metal pull chain swaying slightly, like it had just been touched. There was dust on the floor, but no prints, no disturbances, just silence. And that smell, faint, but unmistakable. Rust, mold, dust, and iron. He didn't open the hatch. The next day she was back in class. Same seat, same clothes, same posture, as if the past 24 hours hadn't happened at all. She hadn't showered, hadn't brushed the dirt from her cuffs, hadn't changed a thing. But something was different. Her eyes. They weren't dead. They weren't empty. They were watching him now. Not directly, not obviously, but he could feel it, like heat on the back of his neck when he turned away. She was tracking him, observing him the way an animal might watch a trap being set. At one point, he dropped his pen. It rolled across the floor. She picked it up before he could, holding it between two fingers, like it was made of glass. Then she passed it to him, without saying a word. Her fingers were cold, too cold. He took it, nodded, mumbled something that wasn't even a thank you. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, just a slight upturn, like a reflex learned long ago and half forgotten. Then she turned back to her notebook, where she had written nothing, not a single word. Ethan watched her as she sat still and unmoving for the rest of the class, and in that moment, he realized something he hadn't dared to think before. She hadn't joined the university. She had returned to it. just like she said. Chapter 3. Dust and Iron. The dreams began the same night the whispers started. At first, Ethan thought they were just the residual static of his overactive brain, half-thoughts folding into sleep, bleeding into images. A classroom dim and empty, desks peeled back like ribs, the scent of mildew thick in his nose. In the dream, he was always alone, until he wasn't, until he turned and saw her, Lena, standing at the back of the room, soaked to the bone, mouth half open as though she were about to speak. But the sound never came. Only that cold metallic smell, clinging to the air. He woke with a jolt, sheets tangled around his legs, the darkness pressing close around his bed like a second skin. Outside, the wind scraped dry leaves across the sidewalk. Inside, the walls made that hollow sound again, the slow shift of wood, settling, or something else trying not to be heard. He lay awake for a long time, listening. The noise began in the ceiling, a faint shuffling, as if something was crawling through the insulation above his room. Then came the scratching, slow, deliberate, like nails dragged lightly across wood. Not rats, too slow, too human, too measured. The next morning he stood in the hallway staring up at the attic door. The metal pull chain swayed gently, although the air was still. Dust hovered in the shaft of morning light like suspended ash. He didn't open it. Not yet. Later, when Tanya came home from her lab shift, she flopped onto the living room floor, backpack flung aside, earbuds still around her neck. Her eyeliner was smudged, green hair pulled back in a half-hearted bun. "Have you been stress-pacing again?" she asked, eyeing the worn patch in the rug by the window. Ethan didn't answer right away. He watched the house next door through the glass. The porch light had stopped blinking. Now it just burned. Constant and sterile. "There's something up there," he said eventually, barely loud enough for her to hear. Tanya blinked. "Like, in the attic?" He nodded. "Scratching. Last night. A few nights, actually. Probably raccoons or pigeons. We had pigeons once back in Toronto. Laid eggs in the drywall. Whole house reeked." He didn't say anything. The silence drew her gaze, more carefully, to his face. "You look like crap, dude." He shrugged and muttered something about needing sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. Not anymore. That night, Ethan sat on his bed with the lamp on low, the hum of the bulb filling the silence. The attic above remained quiet, oppressively so. But something else had changed. His room smelled different. Subtle at first, but insistent. Like wet stone and rusted metal. Like old blood dried into floorboards. The kind of smell you couldn't scrub out, only layer over. He pulled back his pillow to adjust it, and froze. There, curled beneath the edge of the case, was a long strand of black hair. Not his. Too long. Too dark. He hadn't had anyone in his room. His stomach turned. He threw the pillow aside and checked beneath the bed, behind the dresser, in the closet. Nothing. But the air felt colder now, like a draft, leaking through invisible cracks. He didn't sleep. The next day, Lena was absent from class. Her chair in the third row remained empty, though no one else seemed to care. The professor didn't mention her name. No one even glanced toward the space she used to fill, as if she'd never been there at all. But Ethan remembered. The weight of her stare, the smell, the pen she handed him with those freezing fingers. He remembered it so vividly he had to check his pocket, half expecting it to still be there. It wasn't. He left early. That evening, the house next door looked wrong. It wasn't anything obvious. The walls were still cracked, the grass still overgrown, but the way the curtains hung was different, tighter, like they'd been pulled taut to hide something just behind them. And the windows. He hadn't noticed before, but the glass was too clean. Not recently cleaned, just untouched, impossibly untouched, for a house supposedly abandoned for so long. As he stood outside watching it, a shape moved behind the upstairs window. Not walking, not pacing, just shifting, like a figure rising from a crouch. He went inside. Ben was playing music in the kitchen, humming off-key and burning something on the stove. The smell of charred toast filled the air. Ethan didn't speak. He just climbed the stairs, 2 at a time, heart thudding in his ears. He stood beneath the attic door, staring up at it. Then he reached for the chain. The wood groaned as he pulled, the hatch dropping an inch with a dry crack. A faint breeze spilled down, cold, unnatural, carrying the scent he'd come to recognize too well. Something metallic, something left in a basement for years and forgotten. The ladder creaked under his weight as he climbed. The attic was dark, not pitch black, just dim enough that everything felt vague and distorted. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, but when he pulled the string, it didn't light. He moved slowly, using the faint glow from the hallway below to orient himself. Boxes lined the corners, slumped and rotting, spilling old yellowed newspaper and moth-eaten fabric. Something rustled in the far corner. He froze. The sound stopped too. Then, something skittered across the far side, too large for a rat, too fast for a person. He turned to leave, but something caught his eye. A smear. Along the wooden beam near the floor. He crouched and leaned closer. It was a handprint, smudged and dark, but unmistakably human. The fingers were long, and they dragged downward, as if the person had been trying to pull themselves out. Back in his room, Ethan locked the door, though no one else ever came in. He shoved a chair beneath the handle, and when he finally lay down, he checked the pillow before resting his head. Another black hair. This one was shorter, fresh. The light next door was still on, unblinking. Chapter 4. Through the crawlspace. It was colder in the attic than it should have been, not just chilly, not just a draft creeping in through the vents, but cold in a way that felt intentional. Still, tight, breath-stealing. Ethan stood at the top of the ladder, one foot resting just over the threshold, pulse loud in his throat. His flashlight cut through the gloom like a blade, revealing corners heavy with shadows, a roofline slouched inward, the insulation bulging from beneath loose boards like overgrown fungus. The air didn't move. Dust clung to everything like ash that had settled and never been disturbed. And yet, something had moved. He was sure of it. That smear from the night before was still there, just beside the beam to the left. A handprint, smeared downward, as though whoever left it had tried to drag themselves toward the attic door, and failed. He stepped inside. The wooden floor groaned beneath his weight in that reluctant, warping way of old wood. But it was the silence that bothered him most. It wasn't the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of something holding its breath. The flashlight flickered. He gave it a quick shake, muttered a curse, then continued, the beam skating across torn boxes and hunched furniture, covered in stained sheets. There were signs someone had been up there recently. Not squatters, more precise than that. Patterns in the dust, a cleared path from the attic hatch toward the far end, where the roof dipped lowest. And the smell, faint but clear. Rust and old meat, threaded with something fungal, like mold growing behind wet wallpaper. He crouched and pushed aside a collapsed bookshelf. Beyond it, the floor dipped into a crawl space that ran along the outer edge of the house. It was narrow, the insulation yellowed and crumbling, the drywall flaking like scabbed paint. His shoulder brushed against exposed nails as he eased forward. The beam of the flashlight twitched across the crawlspace walls, then caught something. A shape, small, piled, not furniture. Bones. Dozens of them. Arranged not in a haphazard scatter but in spirals. Careful, ritualistic. Ribs, femurs, fragments of skulls. Animal, mostly. But not all. Ethan's mouth went dry. Then he saw the door. It wasn't really a door, just a warped panel of plywood pressed over a frame at the very edge of the crawlspace wall, where his house ended and the neighboring one began. It looked handmade. Old nails, different sizes. A rusted latch held it shut, but barely. He hesitated. His breath misted in the flashlight beam. He flipped the latch. The door groaned open on swollen hinges. Beyond it was darkness, thicker, blacker than before. Not just from the lack of light, but from the way the space seemed to absorb what little his flashlight offered. He had the sudden feeling that he was crossing a boundary, one that wasn't meant to be noticed, let alone breached. Still, he crawled forward. The crawl space connected directly into the attic of the neighboring house. It was larger than his, but emptier, cleaner somehow. The air had that same frozen weight. At the far end, heavy rafters arched above a sloped ceiling like ribs overhead. A single window, caked in grime, let in the faintest smudge of light from the street lamp below. Just enough to make out the thing in the center of the room. A cage, not large, not new. Iron bars, tarnished with age, the floor inside layered in straw, blankets, something dark and rotting in the corners, chains bolted into the rafters above it, like a makeshift hoist. The cage door was shut, secured with an old padlock, rusted but intact. And inside the cage, curled in on herself like a dying animal, was a girl. She wasn't moving, not at first. Just a pale figure tangled in torn fabric, arms wrapped tightly around her legs, hair matted against her face. For a moment, Ethan thought she was dead. Then her head lifted. Eyes blinked through the curtain of hair, wide, glassy green. Her face was bruised, hollowed by hunger and time, but familiar. Not just familiar. Identical. It was Lena. Not the version that sat silently in lecture halls. Not the girl who smelled of iron and cold earth. This one was different. Real. She tried to speak, but no sound came out, only a rasp, dry and raw. Her hands reached through the bars, trembling, nails cracked and dirty. She pointed behind him, frantic. Her mouth opened again. Ethan leaned closer, trying to make out the shape of her lips, but the warning came too late. A noise, barely audible at first, rose behind him, a long, slow creak, like something shifting weight across old beams. He turned, but the crawlspace was empty. Nothing moved, nothing watched, and yet the air felt heavier, like breath was being held, like something enormous was crouched just out of sight, waiting for him to see it. He turned back to the cage. The girl was sobbing now, silently, shoulders shaking, her hands covering her ears like a child trying to block out thunder. Ethan stumbled backward, crawling fast toward the crawlspace opening, hands scraping on splinters, heartbeat jackhammering behind his ribs. The scent hit him hard, stronger now, metallic, rancid. Something wet was on the floor. He didn't look at it. He slipped back into the crawlspace and slammed the panel shut behind him, his breath ragged in his chest. The bones were still there, the silence still thick. But something had changed. Something had noticed. By the time he made it back to his own attic, dawn was breaking, thin blue light creeping through the cracks in the roof. His clothes were streaked with dust and blood, though he didn't know where the blood had come from. He climbed down the ladder, locked the attic door behind him, and shoved the dresser beneath it. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He hadn't spoken to her. Not really, but her eyes had said enough. She didn't belong in that cage. And the thing walking around in her skin wasn't her. Chapter 5. The Other Lena. She was sitting in her usual seat. Same third-row desk, same black sweater, oversized and unraveling at the sleeves. Same lifeless skirt draped like a funeral cloth around her knees. Lena sat with her hands folded in front of her, head bowed, as if praying or pretending to be asleep. But she wasn't sleeping. And she wasn't Lena. Ethan couldn't stop looking at her. Not because he wanted to, because his body didn't seem to know what else to do. His eyes were drawn to her, like a compass spinning off-axis, tugged towards something it didn't recognize as north anymore. The same girl who'd stared through him in silence just days ago, who never blinked, never moved unless it served some slow, precise choreography, now sat different. Not overtly, but enough. Enough for him to notice. She was alert, aware. Her chin tilted just slightly, like she could hear him breathing from 2 rows back. One pale hand moved, brushing her hair behind her ear. Not as a nervous tick, but like someone performing an echo of what she'd seen other people do. Like she was remembering a behavior rather than feeling it. Mimicry, not muscle memory. He watched her the entire lecture. She never turned around, never made a move toward him. But he felt it. She knew. After class, she stood. It wasn't the way normal people stood, gradual, natural, distracted. It was mechanical, exact, like someone testing out new legs. Ethan waited a beat too long to pack his bag, and by the time he reached the hallway, she was already there. Waiting. She wasn't looking at him, not directly. Her eyes were half-lidded, cast toward the ground, but her body was angled in that unmistakable way, a trap laid in plain sight. A magnet spun into his path. She was waiting for him to pass, not to speak. He did. Of course he did. And as he moved past her, her shoulder brushed his. It was just a graze, accidental by every appearance, but her sweater left a faint smear of ash on the arm of his jacket, so faint it could have been dust, but the smell was sharper. He knew it now like a brand in his lungs. Dust and iron. The moment stretched. Her head turned slowly, and for the first time, she looked him full in the face. Her eyes were darker than before. Not just tired. Asterisk deeper, asterisk. Bottomless. Like 2 black holes dressed in skin. Ethan froze mid-step. Then she smiled. Not the twitch of muscle he'd seen weeks ago. Not the reflex of a scared girl trying to seem small. This smile was deliberate, wide, wrong. It stretched too far, too smooth, as though the skin didn't quite know how to follow the bones beneath it. Teeth lined up too neatly. The corners of her mouth trembled, not with emotion, but effort. Like her face was a suit being worn. He couldn't move. She leaned in, slowly, her voice so quiet, it barely stirred the space between them. "You've been in my house." Ethan's stomach dropped. The hallway spun. She blinked once, finally, and stepped past him without waiting for a reply. And just like that, she was gone. He didn't remember walking home. The world felt too loud, too fast, the colors too sharp around the edges. By the time he reached the front steps, his hands were shaking. He fumbled the key into the lock and slammed the door behind him, heart climbing into his throat. Ben was on the couch, controller in hand, one sock on, the other missing. "You good, man?" he asked, eyes not leaving the screen. Ethan nodded too quickly. "Just bad lecture." Ben snorted. "Aren't they all?" Ethan didn't stay to explain. He went straight up the stairs and locked himself in his room. The house was silent. No laughter from Tanya's room. No music leaking from Ben's Bluetooth speaker. Just that hollow stillness again, the kind that seemed to stretch between the walls, as if the air was waiting to be broken. He checked the attic door. Still bolted. The dresser was still wedged beneath it, heavy and unmoved. But when he turned back toward his bed, he noticed something else. There was a mark on the floor. Small, circular, wet. It looked like a bare footprint, just one, facing the door. He didn't sleep. Not that night, not really. He dozed in short fits, eyelids twitching, a constant thrum behind his ears, like his skull was full of static. At one point he dreamed, he thought it was a dream, of hearing breathing inside his closet. Deep and slow, like lungs too large to fit inside a human chest. In the dream, the closet door opened half an inch. In the morning, it was open the same amount. He told Tanya everything over breakfast, or tried to. She stirred sugar into her tea, watching him with one raised brow and no expression. "You broke into their attic," she said flatly, "through a crawl space." "I didn't break anything," he muttered. "It was already there." "And you saw what? A twin?" "Not a twin." "Okay, so, what? A clone? A ghost?" Ethan didn't answer. Tanya leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "I know weird when I see it. And you? You're spiraling, Moss." "I'm not." "Maybe you are, maybe not. But either way, you've got that look, like you're chasing something with teeth." He didn't respond. She stood, grabbed her bag. "You're gonna get hurt if you keep digging. Whatever you think is happening, leave it alone." But it was already too late for that. Later that afternoon, he checked the attic again. The crawlspace door on his side was still sealed. He tapped along the boards. Nothing moved. No sound came back. No sobbing. No cage. He climbed back down. But as he turned toward his bedroom, something caught his eye. On the floor beneath the window, half tucked beneath the curtain, was a tiny smudge of ash. He picked it up. Blackened, fragile, human hair. Shorter than Lena's, fresher than it should have been. That night, he locked his door, shoved the dresser back beneath the attic hatch, and left the light on. Outside, across the lawn, the porch bulb glowed, not flickering, just steady, like a signal. Chapter 6. Nest of Echoes. The microfilm reader at the town archive buzzed with a dull mechanical whine. Ethan blinked against the flickering screen as blurred black and white headlines slid past. Most were what you'd expect from a place like this. Zoning permits, school board decisions, obituaries written in stiff formal prose. But he wasn't here for that. He was searching for something older, stranger. He adjusted the dial and leaned closer. Dust clung to the edge of the machine like a scab. His fingers smelled faintly of rust and old ink. Time passed differently in here. Outside, rain beat gently against the narrow windows, whispering against the glass. Then he found it. Local girl missing after family returns to Vault House. dated 31 years ago. September, same street, same house. Her name was Merrill Braith, 17. Last seen, walking past the abandoned house next door. The article didn't speculate much, just the usual. Police investigating, no evidence of abduction, weather possibly a factor. But there was something off about the wording. A single quote from a neighbor. The family had just moved back in. Said the house had been in their blood for generations. The girl, Merrill, was seen speaking to one of their children. A girl, very pale, wore gloves even in the heat. The paper didn't mention the girl again. Ethan printed the page and tucked it into his backpack. He found 2 more reports, spaced out over the following decade. Each time, someone vanished within a block of the vault residence. Always female, always young, always described at least once as withdrawn. And in every instance, there was a reference to the same family. Quiet, private, moved back into the neighborhood, not quite known. In every photo that included the vault house, it looked identical, unchanged, not newer, not older, just frozen, like it had never moved forward at all. That night, Ethan dreamt he was in the attic again. The ceiling stretched higher than it should have, rafters towering like cathedral beams. The cage was still there, but empty. Chains swung softly in the silence. The straw inside was dark, clumped. Something stirred in the shadows. He tried to move. His legs wouldn't respond. The boards beneath him felt soft, damp. A shape peeled away from the wall. Long arms, limbs that bent in strange places. He didn't see its face. He woke with a sharp inhale. The rain still whispered outside. But now, it sounded closer. Like it had found a way in. Like it was dripping inside the walls. He got up, barefoot, floorboards cold beneath his soles, and stepped to the window. Across the street, the vault house was lit again. All of it. Every window glowing faintly, like the whole place had been plugged into a single dying source of electricity. The upstairs curtain had been drawn back. A silhouette stood behind the glass. Not Lena this time. Someone taller, narrow shoulders, thin neck. Mr. Vault, maybe, or whatever wore his skin now. The next morning, Tanya wasn't in the kitchen. Her mug sat on the counter, half full, the tea cold, a spoon still in it. Ethan called her name. No answer. Ben didn't know where she'd gone either. Claimed she left around midnight. Said she looked weird. She said she wanted to go talk to your dead girlfriend. He joked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I assumed she meant that in the metaphorical sense. Ethan didn't laugh. He went to Tanya's room. The door was ajar, clothes still hanging, backpack still slumped against the dresser. Her notebook lay open on the bed, but the writing trailed off halfway through a sentence. Her favorite boots were gone, but not the jacket she never left without. He checked outside. The grass between the 2 houses was damp with fresh prints, not from shoes, bare feet, small, narrow, as though someone had walked through the dew in silence and without hesitation. He followed them as far as he could. They ended at the neighbor's basement door. The door was shut, no lock visible, no sign of force, just wood warped and blackened with age, sealed tightly against its frame. But someone had scratched something into the bottom corner. A spiral. Not a perfect one, but close. He turned back toward his own house and nearly stepped on it. Tanya's necklace. Half buried in the grass, chain broken, the charm, a tiny silver beetle, smeared with something reddish-brown. Not fresh, but not old either. Ethan picked it up. His hand trembled. That evening, he went back to the archives. This time, He didn't look at news clippings. He looked at property records, death certificates, school rosters, church directories. The Vault family name came up too often, sometimes spelled slightly differently. Vault, 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 but always the same address. Sometimes the photos were decades old, but the parents always looked the same. Same slouched man, with a hollow stare. Same brittle woman, with a powdered face. In one grainy photo from 1964, they stood behind a young girl with long dark hair. Her eyes had been scratched out, not by damage, on purpose, with ink, and behind them, in the upstairs window, barely visible, was another face. Pressed to the glass, eyes wide, mouth open. Ethan left before the sun went down. He didn't go home. He went to the condemned house near the end of the street, the one that had been boarded up for years, rumored to have once belonged to a hoarder. He broke the side lock with a rock. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and cat urine, the wallpaper peeling in yellow sheets. He searched the rooms, the closets, the crawl spaces. In the upstairs bedroom, behind a false panel in the closet wall, he found a shoebox. Inside, an old cassette tape, labeled in shaky handwriting. She is not alone. He borrowed an old cassette player from the campus library, listened to the tape that night with the lights off, door locked, back pressed against the wall. It was audio, just static at first, then a voice, female, young, muffled, terrified. She watches through the walls. She mimics. It's not her. It's wearing her. Then silence. Then a different voice. Soft. Slow. I was hungry, and she let me in. Click. End of tape. Ethan sat there in the dark, the sound still ringing in his ears, the words etched like frost into the back of his skull. He knew now what he was dealing with. Not just a ghost, not even a possession. This was older, more cunning, something that learned by watching, waiting, mimicking, and it was still hungry. Chapter 7. The Hollow Trade. The dream had returned again. This time, Ethan wasn't in the attic. He was beneath it, far below the floorboards, in a space that didn't exist. A void lined with teeth and wallpaper. The air dripped. The walls pulsed like living tissue. And somewhere in that darkness, something dragged itself closer. Slow, deliberate. Clawed hands grazing the walls as it whispered his name. Not out loud, not exactly, but asterisk through asterisk the wood. Into him. He woke with a gasp, the sheets damp against his back, chest heaving as if he'd been running. The attic door above him hadn't moved, but he didn't need to check anymore. He knew it was awake. By now, the world had begun to rot around the edges. Ben hadn't been home in 2 days. He left a half-mumbled voicemail saying he was crashing at a friend's, maybe for the week. The vibe's just weird, man, he'd said. No offense, but you've been acting possessed. And the house is freezing, and I swear I saw someone standing in the hallway last night that wasn't either of us. Ethan didn't blame him. Tanya was still missing. Her phone went straight to voicemail. The police had been called, of course. Posters were made, statements taken, but no one looked too hard. Girls disappeared. It was a tragedy, but not uncommon. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Tanya hadn't left. She'd just gone into the wrong house and hadn't come back out. The porch light next door had begun to flicker again, but this time it didn't pulse like breath. It flickered like a signal, a warning, or an invitation. That afternoon, Ethan walked home from class with the weight of decision pressing down on him like wet snow. Every breath felt shallow. Every footstep slowed by the gravity of what he knew he had to do. The fake Lena hadn't been in class. Her desk sat empty, untouched. But that didn't comfort him. It felt like absence before a storm. When he turned onto his street, she was waiting. She stood on the porch of the vault house, beneath the light, wearing the same black sweater and skirt that never seemed to gather a speck of dirt, never seemed to wrinkle or fade. Her hands hung at her sides, fingers twitching faintly like antennae. He didn't stop walking, but she stepped down off the porch and onto the sidewalk, her boots landing too quietly for how solid they looked. He had intended to walk past her, to ignore her completely, but she spoke. "You saw her." The words stopped him. She was closer now, too close. Her mouth barely moved when she spoke, as if speech was unfamiliar, a costume she wasn't used to wearing. "She wanted you to. She needed to be seen." Ethan swallowed hard. His voice came out raw. "You're not her." "No," she said almost cheerfully, "but I remember her. I remember all of them." The air smelled like damp walls and iron. Her voice didn't echo, didn't rise or fall. It simply asterisk was asterisk, like breath fogging a mirror. "What are you?" he asked. She tilted her head slightly, like the question amused her. "I'm what's left," she said. "What's always been left. We nest, we wear, and when they fray, we find new ones." "Like Tanya?" The smile that crept across her face was slow, stretched. "She was loud, but she'll soften." Ethan stepped back. "You won't stop me." "No," she said softly, "but you could take her place. You're almost hollow already." His chest tightened. She stepped forward, and this time he saw it. The way her shadow flickered, too fast, too fluid, like it had more limbs than her body allowed. Something moved behind her eyes, as if looking through her, rather than from inside. "Take it," she whispered. "She'll be free." "I don't believe you." "You will." And then she was gone. Not walked away. Not faded. Gone. Just space where she had been. Cold air, the porch light flickering again behind her, rhythmic now, pulsing slow like a countdown. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He waited. When the sky turned the color of bruised milk and the house creaked with early autumn wind, he pulled on his coat and climbed the stairs. The attic door loomed above him, but he didn't hesitate. Not this time. The ladder unfolded with a soft groan. The air that met him was heavy and cold, thick enough to taste. He climbed up into the darkness. The crawlspace door on his side had been torn open. No lock, no latch. Just splintered wood, as if something had pushed through from the other side. He crawled forward, flashlight in one hand, breath trapped in his throat. The spiral of bones was still there, but now something new had been added. Hair, strands of it, tangled, knotted, woven through the center of the spiral, like thread through a needle. And at the far end, the trap door into the vault attic. It was open. He pulled himself through slowly, legs shaking now, not from fear, but because something was humming through the floor beneath him. A vibration, low, like chanting felt through the spine instead of heard. The attic was alive. Chains still hung above the cage. The smell was unbearable, and she was still inside. Real Lena. Her face was sunken, lips cracked, eyes wide. She looked up when he entered, her hands lifting weakly toward the bars. He approached. She reached through the cage and touched his cheek, and he saw it. Her memories, her life before this. The day she was taken. The moment something stepped out of the shadows and smiled with her face. The thing didn't kill her. It just replaced her and left her to rot. "I'm getting you out," Ethan whispered. But behind him, something groaned. Not the floor, not the rafters, something else. He turned. Mr. Vault stood in the doorway, slouched, gray. His mouth was open, but nothing came out. His eyes were flat, black, and deep. He wasn't alone. Mrs. Vault stepped in beside him, her dress stained at the hem. One arm twisted too far at the elbow, fingers twitching backward. They moved like mannequins, animated by a puppeteer who had never seen a real person move. And behind them, on all fours, crawling through the doorway with a mouth that unhinged too wide, came Lena. The other Lena, the mimic. Her voice spilled into the air like smoke. Trade places. Ethan stepped between her and the cage. I said no, and she smiled, because they both knew that saying no wasn't the same as stopping her. Chapter 8. She sleeps in the attic. Ethan was never found, not officially, not in the way that involved missing posters or news articles or student-wide search efforts. A police report was filed, sure. His roommates gave a half-hearted statement to a detective who barely made eye contact, and the university sent out a coldly worded email about mental health resources and remembering to check in on one another. A week later, his room was cleared out. Whatever hadn't been claimed by family, if there was any, was boxed and left on the porch in the rain. By then, Ben had already moved out. Tanya was still gone. Her name faded from conversation even faster. The street returned to silence. The vault house, with its dead garden and blackened windows, sat unchanged. For a while, its porch light stayed off, as though in mourning. But one morning in late October, when the sky looked like wet paper and the trees were nothing more than charred silhouettes, that same bulb flickered on again, steady, dim, but alive. A new family had moved in. No moving truck, no posted sale, no neighbors watching the welcome party. One day, the house had stood empty, a bruise at the edge of the street. The next, it had been claimed, and no one noticed. Or if they did, they chose not to remember. The girl arrived first. She appeared at the university like a misplaced shadow, young, pale, drawn in by some invisible tether. Her clothes didn't fit quite right, not in the way that fashion failed, but in the way a borrowed skin might. Too large at the shoulders, sleeves tugged too far down her hands, boots with soles so thick they made no sound on tile. She never smiled, she never spoke unless called on, and even then, her words came out in fragments, half-rehearsed. The kind of speech that sounded less like thought and more like imitation. They called her quiet, awkward. Some whispered she was homeschooled, that she might have come from overseas or from one of those mountain towns where everyone kept to themselves. Rumors formed like mold on bread, quick, sour, and familiar. Some laughed behind her back. A few girls posted pictures of her from behind, captioned with jokes about ghosts and taxidermy. But none of them touched her, and none of them stared for long, because there was something strange about the way she moved. Too smooth, too slow, as if every limb had to remember its purpose before it acted. One girl, a freshman named Marianne, watched her more closely than the others, not out of cruelty, not even curiosity, just a gnawing sense of recognition. She'd seen the girl walking home once, just ahead of her on the street, coat whipping behind her like a shadow trying to detach. The girl didn't blink, didn't react to the wind. Her fingers were twitching at her sides, lightly tapping out a rhythm on her skirt. A pattern, like Morse code, like breathing. And when she turned the corner toward the vault house, Marianne stopped walking. Something was wrong. She didn't know Ethan. Not really. He'd lived down the street, maybe, in that house with the broken steps and moss-covered railing. She remembered seeing him once or twice, coming out with headphones in, carrying a crumpled notebook, looking over his shoulder like someone expecting bad news. She remembered thinking he looked tired. Not in the way students usually were, but deeply, permanently tired, like he hadn't rested in years. And now he was gone. But the attic window hadn't stayed empty. Some nights Marianne would leave her blinds cracked, just slightly, and watch the top floor of the vault house. It was always dark, the way an eye closes in sleep, but never fully dreams. But every few nights, the shape would appear. A figure, unmoving, staring out as if still searching, as if trying to remember why it had come here in the first place. She never told anyone what she saw. She never asked questions. The university kept going. Professors taught. Students crammed for exams. Leaves fell, and the air turned sharper. No one talked about the missing anymore. Not Ethan, not Tanya, not Lena. Their names had dried up and cracked off the walls like old paint. The new girl kept attending class, kept sitting in the same seat, kept tracing the edge of her notebook with a finger that twitched just slightly too often. And no one noticed that she never aged. Back inside the house, beneath the attic's rotted beams and rusted chains, Ethan sat by the window. He hadn't moved in days, or maybe it had been months. Time felt like something flattened and pressed between two pieces of glass. Every now and then, the thing inside him stirred, not painfully, not violently, just a low thrum in the base of his spine, like a reminder, a hand pressing gently against the back of his skull. But it hadn't left. Not fully. He hadn't let it. That was the deal. It could wear him, but only here, only inside these walls. He remembered the moment he made the decision, the cold on his skin, the girl in the cage sobbing as the mimic unfurled itself beside her. It hadn't spoken with words. It hadn't needed to. Its presence had been enough, its promises hollow, but persistent. It wanted freedom. It wanted to taste the world again. It had done it before, countless times. It would do it again, unless it was trapped, unless someone stayed. So Ethan had stayed, and now he watched, and now he waited. Because even monsters need vessels. Even darkness needs a window to peer through. Down on the street, the girl walked home from class. Her boots were silent on the pavement. Her head never turned. She passed the rusted fence, the leaning mailbox, the cracked steps that led to the front door, and behind the attic glass, Ethan's reflection flickered once. The porch light came on. It blinked. And then it held.